Well, good evening, Nevada Firearms Coalition members. Welcome to the September, right? No, August. What month am I in? Geez, I'm looking out at our very dark sky because it's so smoky in Reno, and I'm thinking it's later than it is. So it's August. To our August firearms call with members. And we are very happy to have our Secretary of State, Barbara Cegavske, as well as her sidekick, Mark. And Mark, I'm not going to say your name because I know I'm going to crucify it. So I'll let you, when you introduce yourself, say your name. And this is a little different topic than usual. We've had several members asking us the importance of voting and how we can change our legislature, make it more Second Amendment friendly, how we can change our governor, make him more Second Amendment friendly, and can we really trust the elections to see those changes? And so Barbara's kind of used to this question at this point. It's been a tough year for Barbara to have to continually defend her office. And so we thought it best that if folks have questions, let's just go right to the source. And that's what we can do. And that's what we've done. And I want to welcome Barbara and Mark this evening to our firearms call. And again, we're not going to be talking CCWs or anything that's firearm related necessarily. It's mostly just why it's important to vote and how you fit, and how hopefully we can reassure you that your vote will count and it will matter. And with that, I will turn this over to Madam Secretary of State, Barbara Cegavske.
Thank you so much, Randy, and good evening to everybody, all the members. It's nice to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the 2020 election. One of the things that we wanted to make sure and tell you, and this is Mark Balashin, he's my elections deputy. We have 8 divisions in the Secretary of State's office. So just want you to know that's why I have different deputies. We've got 6 of them, and they come in and will talk and help with some of the criteria and things that we find really important. One of the things that you might not know, and we want to give you information tonight, is we have 17 counties in Nevada, and the 17 counties are made of 15 elected clerks who you elect, and then they are the county commissioners are who give them the guidelines and tell them what to do in those 15 counties. Now, the 2 appointed, Washoe and Clark, are appointed by the county commissioners, and they also are guided by the county commissioners. That's who writes their laws and tells them what they can and can't do, or I should say their rules. So we are guided by the legislature. The legislature writes laws, and then every 2 years there's new election laws that come out that we have to either put in or start working on, and that's what we do every 2 years. We'll go in and testify in favor or against bills, and there are quite a few that come out, and people have ideas of what they would like, and then we try to talk to them and tell them where we're at and what the law is currently. So that's just a little brief background of what the Secretary of State's office is, and then I'll introduce Mark, and then we'll get into your questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Balashin. I'm Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, as mentioned. A little bit of background on myself before we jump into the questions as well. I've been the Deputy for Elections since October. Prior to that, I was part of the agency as well, though, and have been with the Secretary now for just about 2 years. Before that, though, again, I was also part of the gun club, so to speak. I spent 20 years in the United States Marine Corps, initially as an enlisted infantryman, and then when I was a sergeant, I was commissioned and then finally retired just in December of 18. As a major. So I mentioned that in part to express, again, a common understanding of firearms, but also so that as we talk about these questions going forward, I hope you understand that my desire to remain nonpartisan and to support the needs of everybody in the state is very true. And it's something that I've carried with me throughout my entire previous career. That the critical eye that I have, my attention to detail, my professional curiosity, it is not something that I retired when I got out of the military and the uniformed services, but absolutely it is something that the Secretary has asked me to continue to apply when looking at things with a very critical eye, and how we can continue to build upon and improve things here in Nevada when it comes to elections.
Well, Mark, I first want to say thank you for your service. It's a beautiful thing, especially right now, to be seeing in frustration what's happening in Afghanistan. So thank you for your service, first and foremost. So obviously the first thing on everybody's mind was the turning to all mail-in ballots and using COVID as the excuse. And yet even the governor went out and voted in person and early voting. So can you kind of just explain some of the politics? And again, I know you're in an elected position now to where you have to follow the law, but you were a state senator. So in the legislature, you had to be that partisan. And I admire you for not really being that partisan now. It's a very difficult line you have to walk sometimes. But was this just part of the National Democratic playbook to use COVID as a way to really expand the voter base or expand, as they say, access to voting? When a lot of us feel that they were sending out ballots to folks that hadn't voted in years and frankly hadn't even lived in some homes in years. So kind of just give us a little bit of, I guess, of your perspective of the background of the push for mail-in voting.
Thank you for that question. And it's one that we like to talk about and give information on. Now, the first mail-in ballot we did was in the primary. And the reason we did and asked for that is I had 17 counties write me letters asking to do a mail-in ballot. The reasoning behind that for that primary, and that was a very hard decision for me because I'm not a mail-in ballot person. I like to vote in person. My husband and I have always voted in person, and that's just me. So the reasoning behind it was they could not find locations. People did not want to give locations. They were afraid of the spread of COVID. And that's a reality. We also could not find poll workers. The poll workers, and normally for us, are of senior age. And they did not want to come out because they did not want to catch it, the COVID. They did not want to be a part of it or take any part of the primary. So with the request from the 17 counties, we went ahead and gave them permission to do a mail-in ballot. But I did say that it would come back to the regular in-person for the general election. And I did say that. I have it on record that was what I wanted to do. I was trying to help the 17 counties out, and therefore didn't think there would be an issue with that. So with that being said, the Democrats came into play and decided that since we started it, they were going to continue it. And then that's when they asked for the special session, and they got the placement of expanding the mail-in ballots. Then we go to the last election, the last session, and the Democrats were in control and were able to put in a lot of, and I'll have Mark go over most of those, but there were a lot of election bills for us. I mean, we listened to a lot. We came out opposed to many, which we have not been credited on, in my opinion, but we did oppose a lot of them, and to no avail. All we can do is say what we think and where we're going. So that kind of goes into another question, Randy, if you don't mind. I'll go into, in 2018, we went to the legislature and asked them for $8 million. Wayne Thorley and I went and asked them for the money to get new machines because our machines were outdated. Our machines were very old, and we wanted to make sure that we had updated equipment. And so we did the 2018, the primary, the general went fine. We had no problems, no issues there at all. And then 2020 is the rest of the history. But we got $8 million from the legislature, and then each county had to bring in X amount of dollars depending on their size, you know, what they contributed to that account. So they own it, it's theirs. All 17 counties own their machines, and we have only one county that didn't go with Dominion. We had, I don't know if you were here then, if you came or not, Randy, but we had both Dominion and ES&S came and they put their machines out. We left them up for a day up in the old assembly, had people come in, the doors were open, people were able to come in and check them out and see which one they wanted. Carson City went with the paper ballot in the machine, and then everybody else went with Dominion. So that I kind of answered both of those. And yes, we do audits on Dominion voting machines.
So real quick, who decides what machine they're going to use? Is that a Secretary of State decision or is that a county decision?
That's all the counties that they go into their machines and know which ones work. And we do audits, and we do check and verify our machines. A lot of people don't know that we use the Gaming Commission. They come out and audit our machines. They come out and check them, verify them, certify them. They do an excellent job, and we're one of the few states that even knows about it and even does it. And a lot of people that live here don't know that that's what we do.
Man, that's
yes,
right.
Please.
You know, and along those lines too, right? The counties don't just get to pick any old machine and do their own research and that sort of thing. There's actually a state law that requires that the machines that be used have to meet or exceed standards established by the Elections Assistance Commission, a federal agency. When the EAC meets, they kind of envision them looking at like an entire parking lot worth of vehicles, so to speak. They determine which ones are acceptable, and then the states and counties are allowed to pick out of that smaller pool of options that are out there. And because we have a state law that says that they have to meet or exceed those standards, those were the options that the counties looked at. You know, in addition to that, this doesn't just apply to the Dominion machines that 16 of our counties use, but also for the ES&S machines. You know, as the Secretary is saying, we have a requirement, again, a state law that requires that independent audit. So it's not even just that the EAC at the federal level has to approve these machines. Then, you know, the Gaming Commission gets involved as well. They're investigators, the same folks that look at our casino machines and slot machines, use that same level of scrutiny to examine, not just from the outside and make sure that it kind of looks nice and shiny, but they tear the things apart and look in the inside, and they check the hardware to make sure that everything matches exactly what's supposed to be there, exactly what the EAC said was supposed to be there in the first place. They check the software to make sure that the information, the programming that's inside the voting machine matches the exact information that the EAC again said was supposed to be in there. In addition to that, before adopting those machines at the county level, we run audits of these machines like the Secretary talked about. Well, what does that look like? It's actually a kind of a miniature election. We fill out ballots, and this is something that counties also have to do on the county level before and after every single time they're used. Every general election, every primary election, every special election. They have to run a mini election where they fill out ballots according to a certain pattern that they make up. They put it into the machine, then they check the results, and they have to match perfectly. If they don't match perfectly, that machine does not get used in the election. And only when those machines are used and tested to that standard, then they're allowed to be used in the elections. So it's a very extensive process that, you know, as we were kind of talking about a little bit before, Randy, there's all these things that come up with elections that frankly folks just didn't know about and didn't realize that aren't things that we do because we wanna. Like, one, like they're in state or federal law, and two, like from the state level and the clerk level, like we do them because we know it's the right thing to do to make sure the election is secure.
If I can jump in for a second, I'm kind of monitoring the questions that are coming in, and we have lots of questions about the Dominion machines. And I think kind of the premise of the questions that are coming in is, if Secretary Cegavske, if you saw a problem with the Dominion machines, would you as Secretary of State have any ability to raise that question, or would that be limited to the counties or at the federal level?
They can be decertified, those machines, if we see an issue, or if there's something that the clerks find or somebody finds that there's a problem with it, they can be decertified.
In that process, what that looks like is we would tell the counties this, for whatever reason, these machines do not meet the standard of the EAC, the federal standard, or again, our standards, and then they would not be allowed to use that for an election. But again, right, as you can imagine, ever since accusations of improprieties with the Dominion machines came up, we've looked, we don't just sit back and go, oh, I wonder what the deal is. Like, we have looked very closely. We've, again, involved the Gaming Control Board. They're coming out to support another assessment of some other machines that we're going to do. This is an ongoing process where we, as soon as we hear there's smoke somewhere, we look determinedly to find out what the root of the issue is. And if there was an issue, then I'm certain the secretary would have eliminated the use of Dominion machines in this state.
There's a follow-up question from that. I think it's a very fine line, but we have folks asking, what can they do as citizens to trust but verify? Can they inspect machines? Can they actually get their hands on a technical manual to better understand, or does that become its own voter security issue?
That is an excellent point, right? The question about how closely can we allow people to look. The metaphor that I've heard is that, I'll tell people that I have a ring system in my house. We have cameras installed in my house. But if you ask to see the floor plans in my house and want to know my passwords, we wouldn't be able to give that, because then you could potentially, violate the security of my household. Very similarly, if Dominion provided the very specific technical data on the internet, for example, that would become a huge security risk, because now, again, it's probably no surprise to everyone listening that there are domestic and foreign actors who right now are attempting to infiltrate across the country and trying to create more friction. So the question about, what can somebody do to get involved, to trust but verify? Certainly asking us as the trusted source about what that certification process looks like, asking us to see when those certificates were presented in regards to what machines. We have this information on our website. Again, a lot of that is available for use. There are certainly parts of this process that we can describe, and certainly the timing to make sure that these processes and steps are done appropriately according to our statutes before every election. But in regards to, do you want us to, copy the machine's firmware and provide it to somebody? These are things that simply can't be done because of the increased risk that would create.
Well, I think there's not just the concern of the machines, but a lot of the concern was the mail-in ballots and validating the signatures. And so can you kind of explain how a signature verification process was done? I guess more at the county level, but I think that was a lot of concern of these mail-in ballots. Is you could go to any trash can at an apartment complex and just pick up a bunch of ballots that were mailed. I know what happened at my old apartment complex because my tenant told me that people that didn't live there but got a ballot. It would be so easy for people to take those ballots, fill them out, and fake a signature. Or is it easy for people to do that? I think that the whole ballot harvesting issue has really been a concern.
Well, Randy, it's a good thing you brought up the ballot harvesting. I am very opposed to that and thought it was a felony for years. And then one day it's not a felony anymore. That was a real shock to me to have that occur during the legislative session. But I'll let Mark go into more detail of the signature verification, because we have some that have machines, and then we do the training for the signature verification. So I think most people are looking at Clark County because of the machine, and I think there's a lot of misinformation on that. I don't know it personally. I never worked with Joe on that. Joe Gloria is the appointed clerk there, but we do a lot with the signature verification. And as far as we saw one picture that was utilized umpteen times that showed I think there were 11 ballots that were on the ground, And I have no idea where they were from, but that's the picture that was on and just was repeated over and over again. I never saw anything different, never had an address where that was, never knew where it was, what it was. Now, if somebody wants to pick up a ballot and sign off on it and the signature doesn't match, then that's where the clerks call and say, we received your ballot, the signatures don't match, can you verify it? We had a sitting senator that his daughter, her signature didn't match because she was older. And she went down and showed her driver's license and she was able to vote and it worked out fine, but there was a discrepancy in her signature. So they do check them, and it's the 17 clerks that do that. As I said, the 17 counties look at that, verify. But if you don't mind, I'll let Mark get into a little more detail about the signature verification, and he can talk about the machine that Joe Gloria had.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And you're absolutely right. There's a couple of parts of this question that have come up that I think, again, even outside of the focus purely on the signature verification process that I'd like to talk about. So first, again, it is a relatively new process for a lot of folks to even be aware of. That's the reason why, again, the counties have already enacted their own training into, again, developing and understanding how this works. This is also something that here at the state level now, we're going to be directing the training so that everybody involved in the signature verification process gets, again, much more robust and annual training to make sure that they get how this process works.
And that was part of the legislative new laws.
Yes, ma'am, exactly. But the key is, at the end of the day, just like the secretary said, if there's ever a shadow of a doubt that the signature does not match what's on file, and to be clear, it's not just one record of a signature that is compared to. If you fill out a voter registration form by hand, ever in the last few years, or even in some cases going back, more than a decade, the county clerks have those on file and can look closely at your signature to see, again, it's not just one signature to one signature in most cases, it's how you filled out a handwritten form. Or in some cases, they'll have multiple signatures so that as you got older or kind of changed your style or started to put like a heart above the I in your name, they can see how that tracks and then to see if it matches. And if there's any hint of a doubt, they simply say, nope, we're not going to count this until you, the voter, have come in and identified yourself that yes, this is in fact your ballot. And we had folks that said, I didn't send a ballot, got it. This one doesn't count, it goes in the trash. We had folks that we tried to get in touch with, and the counties did this through email, through text messages, through phone calls. Nobody answered the phone, got it. The ballot goes in the trash. When in doubt, we're not going to count it and not going to risk a fraudulent ballot be cast ever, period. So the process, again, is going to continue getting better with this enhanced training. The secretary mentioned that one of our counties, Clark County, employs a machine called an Agilis machine. It's made by a company called Runbeck. Same company, in fact, that does a lot of signature verifications for banks across the country. This machine only matched signatures if it was like 100% spot on, no questions asked. Any other time, it spit it out, and then again, a bipartisan team of people looked at those signatures to see if it matched. And if there was any question, then they would send it off for a signature cure where the voter was notified. That's something that, again, it was a process that's relatively new, but again, not a lot of folks were aware of. That absolutely happens. Kind of an overarching theme too when it comes to mail-in ballots, or something that you brought up a minute ago, Randy, as well. The idea that ballots are sent out to places that maybe folks have moved from. We have a very transient population in our state. A lot of folks move to Vegas, think they're going to make it big, and don't, and then move home. Other folks try to make it big and then move from an apartment to a house to a mansion, and then back to an apartment, within a 6 to 1 year period. So there's different addresses, right? So there's a requirement, therefore, and there was a question that we'll get to here in a little bit, for list maintenance. This is not a one-time event. It's like the laundry, right? It's never actually done. List maintenance happens across our state every single day. Every night, we identify discrepancies, we notify the clerks, they address those concerns through a number of sources that we'll talk about in a little bit. That list maintenance process is something that we've also looked very critically at. Do we do enough? How can we improve the process? folks had said, I've got concerns that, ballots kept coming to my house and I kept tearing them up as fast as I could, not realizing the way that the list maintenance process works. If you get a ballot at your house for a previous tenant and you tear it up, that actually stops the list maintenance process dead in its tracks. The way elections officials track people moving is through this official elections mail. So when a ballot or a postcard shows up to your house for a previous tenant, the correct thing to do is to write return to sender on it and put it back into the mailbox. That letter, postcard, sample ballot will go back to the clerk's office, and that starts a clock. They receive it back. Wait a minute, return to sender. This guy doesn't live at this address anymore. They're required by state and federal law to send out a notification to that voter at that address. We received something back. Are you still at this address? If yes, send us a letter, come talk to us, notify us. If no, you're not going to be an active registered voter for much longer. They get 33 days. That allows 3 days for mail, 30 days for them to reply. If it doesn't come back, that's the starting point for the canceling of that individual voter. In most cases, though, you'll find out that because folks have moved from one place to another, or maybe between counties, as again routinely happens nowadays, that voter may still go to vote, and in fact can. They show up to the polls, they go to a clerk, they just moved, maybe they moved from Nye County to Douglas County. They show up to the clerk's desk in Douglas County. Hey, I just moved here. I think my registration was canceled. All they have to do is show their driver's license and basically a proof that they live where they do and who they are, and immediately they're back on the active rolls. So again, this entirety of the process, from making sure the lists are clean to understanding what your role is in helping keep clean rolls, to individual actions required. All of us need to be working together to make sure that our lists are clean. And believe you me, we are not taking this lightly and are continuing to make sure that the process is even better getting ready for the 22 election.
I think a lot of us were aware of the fraud that existed in the unemployment insurance situation in our state. We had a woman in California that had multiple people living at a condo in Sonoma, and she received multiple unemployment cards. What's going to stop me from signing up 12 people at this address and registering them over the mail to the Washoe County registrar that I have a Joe Smith and a Mary Lou and this and that at this address? What stops fake voter registration?
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, if somebody wants to commit a crime, Brandy, how do you stop it? People commit crimes all of the time, and people do things that are not by the law. They'll do whatever. So for us, there are homes that receive multiple ballots. Those homes could be a place where older people go and stay. It could be a semi-nursing home. There's people that have drug addiction. So we have many of those in Las Vegas area all over. And those people that are there for just a short period of time, they'll register to vote if somebody comes up to them and asks them to register to vote, and they put the current address that they're at. They may have left, but they put that current address, and there could be 10, 12, 15 that come to that address because that's where they were when they registered. So that does happen, but there are people that do bad things, and we try to catch them. As we've talked about, there are people that commit fraud in elections. We go after them. We have criminal investigators, but as the law enforcement agencies ask me, do you want us to solve this murder, or do you want us to go after somebody that committed voter fraud? Now, I have to tell you, just being the Secretary of State, voter fraud means a lot to me to make sure that we don't have that. There is every election we have, we know that there is some. This last election, there was not any proof that there was rampant voter fraud. There's no proof to us at all. We did have some cases. We are working several cases. The 4 boxes that were given to us by the state party, Mark can address those because he and his staff spent over 125 office hours in looking at each and every one of those. A lot of those we already have them as cases, and some of them are civil, and some of them are criminal, and some of them are a person that has dementia. A person that has dementia will one day go ahead and mail it in if they get a mail-in ballot, and then their child or somebody, a friend may come and say, let's go vote. And they go down and vote again. Now, and Mark will talk about that as well, it's the first vote that counts. So if you do go down a second time on knowing, and then we have juniors and seniors. We also belong to a group called ERIC, and I'll have Mark talk about that because he's very involved in that. And this group, we have over 30 states, and you verify with each other to see if somebody from our state voted in your state too. You know, there's double voting. And so we look at ERIC a lot. It's a very helpful tool for us. And and again, that's where you might find a junior and a senior. They don't put that down on there because maybe they don't go by junior or senior, but they have the first name that's the same. And then you have to look at the age, and that's what kind of, you know, gives it up. But you have to verify. And every claim, everything that anybody sends in, we look at. We investigate, we have to send out our criminal investigators, but we do need to have proof. And the proof has to go before a prosecutor, one that'll prosecute for you. Those are very difficult cases to prosecute if they don't have enough evidence. And then we go before there's a board that we go before the grand jury. Thank you. The grand jury, and they'll tell you whether or not the case is good. But we can't talk about all those cases if they're under investigation. We just had another one that was solved from 2016. And the only way it's solved, I mean, it's closed because we got, you know, we're getting a conviction on that. And so it takes a long time sometimes, and sometimes you get people that lawyer up, and then we had COVID-19 hit and everything was closed down. The grand jury wasn't even working. So we do have some cases that it takes a lot longer, and I wish it didn't. I really do, but it's unfortunate for the time that it takes. But Mark, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You know, and Randy, there's a couple of things also to start by talking about the possibility of fake voters, right? There's an entire thing called an election management system. Again, something that most folks don't even realize exists, that every county has, that are designed to combat exactly what you talked about. Folks that say, well, I'm just going to register 5 or 6 different people. Every single ballot that's cast in any election in our state is tied directly to a registered voter. And if somebody registers online or does same-day registration at the, either at the polls or does the automatic voter registration process at the DMV, there's certain information that's gathered. If there's other required information that is not gathered, even if that individual gets their hands on a ballot, it doesn't get counted until the clerks do get the information. So again, if you say, well, I'm going to try to make a bunch of fake people at my address here, we'll see what happens. They may, again, it's possible the clerks will reach out with a postcard. Hey, we need this information. We need driver's license. We need SSN type information. If they don't get it, those ballots will not count. The election management systems are designed so that if you update your voter registration, let's say you get a ballot in the mail, and then you update your voter registration and you change, maybe you move down the street or change precincts or something along those lines. And you think, well, I've got one ballot and they just mailed me a second. Haha, I'm going to get them and I'm going to vote twice. The election management system immediately cancels the first barcode when it sends you the second. Can you mail both of those in? Absolutely. And guess what happens? It captures the first and then it flags the second and we don't count it. And you know what? That's a crime. And now we have evidence that you've sent 2 in because they have your signatures on both of them. And people, like the secretary mentioned, made that decision and made that mistake and earned themselves some very unpleasant conversations with our criminal investigators. Exactly like the process is intended to happen. And like the secretary said, we unfortunately can't talk about that, and we'd like to share the good news stories, but those are still under adjudication. Additionally, myself and the elections division, we take this very seriously, that the entire allegation of fraud, and keeping in mind, we have access to the entirety of the state voter registration list. So what does that mean we can do? Well, for example, leading up to an election, we're able to pull up the entire list and say, let's run a query on every house that has more than, oh, I don't know, 10 individuals registered to it. And this is something that we do. Sometimes it's 10 early on, like right now, we could run to see how many people have 10. Boom, every address across the entire state of everyone that's a registered voter, where there are more than 10 people. We did that during the 2020 election cycle, before the election. And we went back and we looked at every single one of those addresses. Some of them, like the secretary said, were halfway houses, convents, right? In some cases, apartment complexes, and we checked to make sure that the apartment numbers were all unique. All these different things that we can do. As my older brother kind of joked, you know, he's got 9 kids, a very proud Catholic. He's like, you may have also identified a number of Catholic families across the state as well. Be that as it may, that might have been the case. But again, we're looking critically at this to find out who possibly could be conducting voter fraud, because zero fraud is tolerated, not absolutely any fraud. The voter registration list that's available to the public has an extensive amount of information, not personally identifiable information, but we have significantly more access to more information so that we can run these queries, because we know that you want us to, because we know that you wouldn't tolerate for a second somebody making fake registrations and then trying to cast ballots. That's not how our state works. That's not how our elections work. And the secretary would absolutely have me for lunch if we tolerated that for a second. So again, we take it very seriously. We work with the Electronic Registration Information Center, it's called ERIC, to do that not only internal to the state, but external to the state. And there's a number of other processes and steps that we have to make sure our voter rolls are taken care of. And it is truly an ongoing process. When folks ask me, do I get bored after the election's over? What do you do until next November? I like to develop a Twitch, right? Because there's just so much work that we have to do to keep looking, to keep preparing, to keep ensuring the security of this process. It's never done. And this is something the entirety of the elections division, the secretary, of course, and the clerks take very seriously.
Well, I think our members are getting an idea that you guys are true patriots in what you're doing. I appreciate that. So the DMV motor voter bill that passed, I don't know how long ago, how do we verify when somebody registers to vote at the DMV that they're actually a citizen?
I'll let you go ahead. I'm going to let Mark talk about that. This is an area that is very interesting. The DMV, they are their own agency and they are under the governor. They are not under us at all. So I'll let Mark go ahead and talk about that one.
Thank you, Secretary. So to start with, it is a process that, again, is DMV kind of centric, really. They, over the last few years, have gotten better at understanding the voter registration process. They've been a voter registration agency since 1993, I believe it was, when the National Voter Registration Act was passed. The bottom line is that the DMV does not, if somebody uses a non-citizen document to get a driver's authorization card and not a state driver's license, that documentation does not get put through the AVR process. Bottom line, full stop. Now, a lot of folks have asked, well, why don't we demand proof of citizenship? This is something that the Supreme Court actually has decided isn't going to be tolerated, in part because, and this relates back to a few years ago, there was an accusation that a certain state should be doing this. When it got to the Supreme Court determined that if the county or the state rather, election officials had been demanding citizenship, it would have disenfranchised more people than actually committed elections fraud by registering to vote as a non-citizen. So because of that, we look very closely, again, at making sure that all the required information that we have is part of that application. If anybody alleges that their neighbor or someone they know who is not a US citizen has registered to vote, that there are steps we can take, again, assuming there's proof. A mere accusation, and as you can see from you know, what my last name is, right? Like some people have said so-and-so, you know, Voloshin, I don't know what he is, but I don't think he's an American. That by itself isn't evidence, but if we've had people identify and show proof of somebody not being a citizen, and that gets addressed again as a criminal matter appropriately. But it is something, again, that we're continuing to look closely at and make sure that if there's any means possible for us to tighten up how this works, we're absolutely going to do so. But as it currently stands, the process is designed so those individuals are not included in the ADR process.
That's very encouraging, really.
Randy, before you ask a question, can I,
Yes.
from our question feed here, and I do want to let everyone know I am reading all your questions. I'm trying to get a word in edgewise, but I am so enraptured with all of your information that I don't want to cut anyone off. So sorry, Randy, I finally cut you off. One of the questions, or it's been a theme through the questions, is essentially, I think what we're hearing from you tonight, you're catching the bad actors, you're catching the big cases. We all know there's going to be the little ones that slip through. How big of a problem, can you even put a number on that? Should they be worried about, can enough votes slip through of whether it's just negligence, not even malicious, and it could sway an election?
That's quite a bit in all of that. So I'll let Mark talk about it as well, but I don't know what they're referring to, the little ones, the big ones. I mean, we don't really care if it's a big one or a small one. If somebody committed voter fraud, it means a lot to us, and we go after them. We go after single people. We had when I first got in office, we caught a gal that she went to prison. She was doing the registration forms, and if you were one party, she'd switch to another party. And, you know, we caught that. And so a lot of people would call her small potatoes, but that affects, people when they go to vote, or, that their party's been switched. So we take everything. It doesn't matter how big or how small it is. We take everything very serious, and voter fraud is voter fraud. It doesn't matter who you are or how big it is. I wish I could tell you some of the cases that we still have pending and are working on, but we do take individuals hoping to get bigger fish sometimes, but that doesn't always happen.
Thank you.
Exactly, Secretary. One is not acceptable. Yeah, all I'm saying is one is not acceptable, and we spend equal amount of time digging into and investigating a single incident as we do, any others. So it's across the board. And again, this isn't just something that the Secretary is passionate about and that I'm passionate about, and then anybody else rolls their eyes. And no, the entire team is fully on board with this because we get the importance of it, right? We understand that when we talk to our friends, our family, our neighbors, the constituents across the state, this is what you want us to do. This is the level of aggression and eagerness that you want us to pursue in an integrity-based process. So we take that very seriously. And it's not something that we, again, go, it's over there. What county was it in? No, absolutely.
A quick follow-up to that is, do you police the voter rolls as aggressively as you police voter fraud?
Yes, those sorts of questions. Questions about how frequently or how many people live at a certain address. Questions about matching birth dates. Questions about matching or even remotely similar, social security numbers or driver's license numbers. We look at all of these things, trying to find ways that, again, right, humans, especially criminals in many cases, are trying to cut corners. You're not going to create necessarily multiple fake social security numbers. Those get flagged anyway and caught. Clerks identify them and out they go. And we investigate those further. So again, our voter rolls currently, again, we've even since in the last couple of years have identified ways to continue to improve how we maintain our voter lists. May I talk about the vital statistics, for example?
Yeah, if it's okay with you, Randy, we do have a really important issue here, and then we also want to talk about the opt-out.
Yes, ma'am. So one example of how we aggressively, again, look at our voter, the statewide voter registration lists. we noticed again, right? Some folks said, look, I don't know if it's voter fraud or not, but I'm frustrated that I have a loved one who was passed on maybe a year or two ago, and they still got a sample ballot. And then they still got a real ballot. And I'm kind of bothered that their name wasn't removed from the list. Well, when we heard about that again, we don't go, well, I don't know, we're not gonna worry. No, like, why did that happen? What's the root cause that led that to happen when an individual should have been removed from the voter rolls? So we dug into it. First, we also explained, by the way, if you get a ballot, that isn't for you, please write return to sender on it. Don't just tear it up. But then also we looked at the process, and we identified that there was a bit of a turnover issue with the Bureau of Vital Statistics, where some of their personnel and kind of what their expectations were on how they process death records and then compile that information and got it to us as an agency. And then we in turn take the list of people that have passed away, we compare it to the statewide voter registration list, any names that are on there, we pass over to the counties to remove those individuals. And that can happen all the way up to the day of the election in some cases. So when we realized there was a discrepancy, we identified how to fix it. We worked with Vital Statistics, who again was on board fully with fixing it. And then we said, you know what? Just to make sure that 22 is better than 20, let's develop a better process. And we did. We came up with a $0 contract, right? A contract so that it's legally enforceable, that talks about how frequently they have to give us this information. We then went back 13 years, every digital record they have, and they sent them to us. And we compared and looked at all 13 years worth of death records. Anyone that got through the cracks that wasn't removed before was removed again to make sure that our lists are clean going into 22. Again, looking at 20, not just to kind of argue or to say, no, it was good, but how can we improve upon that? How can we make these complaints that we're hearing from the electorate and figure out those root problems to fix it? So we did. We identified some people that were on the list that shouldn't have been, and we have since removed them from our lists across the state and in every county. And now that process that I talked about, where they send information to us, they're now sending it to us 5 days a week. Whereas before it had been previously 1 day a week. But they're also sending to us in the first 2 weeks of January, a roll-up of the previous 12 months, the previous calendar year, just to make sure if anyone passed away that didn't get caught before, we're going to capture it again. Then before every election, primary, general, special election, they're going to send us that year-to-date list as well, so that halfway through the year, as we get ready for the June primary, for example, 120 days before, they're going to send us a list of everybody in 2022 has passed away up to that point, just to make sure. So there's extra layers of redundancy. Because again, why? Because we know that you or any of you that know someone that has passed away, that it's a painful reminder to see a ballot. And again, it creates an image where, even if you had signed it and sent it in, we would have caught it. People did, we caught it, they're talking to law enforcement and no one's smiling, right? So these sorts of things are happening, but our systems are designed to catch it. And again, we're trying to now make that even smoother of a process. And that's one of a number of ways that we're continuing to improve our list maintenance.
So I've got a question of how many investigators you have and what is your budget for investigators? And do you need more money for investigators? You probably always need more money, but.
Yeah, I always need more positions, more people. We have 7 positions, but we only have 6 criminal investigators. It's hard to find, people that want to work in this industry. But we do have, and they have a lot of caseload, let me tell you. There's a lot of stuff that they're looking at because they do securities. They do some elections. I don't have just election investigators. They do security, and security is what happens when your mother or father invests their life savings into a Ponzi scheme, into this guy that says, oh, I'm going to make you a millionaire. And he takes the money and goes, and your parents haven't gotten his phone number. They haven't gotten a signed contract. They have nothing. They just invested the money. So that's what they work on, regularly. You'll see a lot of stuff in the paper about other states and other things that are going on. We also have the same effects with those types of people here in Nevada, and probably more so. So when we have an election case, we go to one of our criminal investigators, we talk to them, find out if it's a criminal case or if it's a civil case. And then we'll proceed with that. But yeah, you can always use more. But you know, that's all we've gotten and that's all we have.
And Secretary, I do appreciate Director Tagliati and how DPS,
Yes.
if there's ever a need where, and there were some brief periods of time where our caseload, those investigators got so big that we reached out and the Department of Public Safety, they have a surge capacity. So it hasn't gotten to the point where we've said, well, we've got a stack of investigations. I guess we'll just, we're gonna wait on it. When in doubt, like we've got federal and state partners that are equally eager to take these cases to investigate them.
And that is in the NRS that the public safety does help us if we are in need. And they have several times taken quite a group of forms that we have that we've given them, and they will investigate them for us and find out. A lot of double voters, things like that, they'll look into that.
So do you think that the mail-in ballot process invites more fraud? I mean, we've been doing absentee ballots, which is somewhat similar to a mail-in ballot, but do you think it really invites more fraud?
Again, I'm going to tell you that I think people that want to do criminal acts do it. I mean, they just do that, and it's unfortunate, but it happens. We have, and I should say Mark has designed a opt-out to the mail-in ballot. We had established where you could send in an absentee request and you could be a permanent absentee requester. We had to remove that because we were told now that everything is going to be mail-in ballot. So we came up with the idea that people were calling. I mean, we had a lot of people that called and said, we don't want a ballot. How do we opt out? So that's what Mark has designed. That's what they've been working on. They've got, a few things to work out, but hopefully by this next election, you'll be able to go in. I want to be the first to go in because I am a in-person ballot person, so I don't get the mail-in ballots. But I want everyone to know that you have an option, and the option is to opt out of getting the mail-in ballot. And so you can do it permanently, or you can do it one time, whatever you want to do. So I think it's wonderful that they've come up with that, with that solution.
Yes, ma'am. And then that's going to help for sure. So that folks that don't want a ballot, keeps that extra ballot out of the mail stream, makes it easier on the clerks in regards to what they have to pay for, right? So there's a cost savings for the counties, of course, which nowadays again always helps. In regards to, does it create opportunities for more fraud? You know what, I hate to say it, but I think people think it does, but it doesn't. And so like we talked about, now that you understand what an election management system is, now that you understand that the barcodes are scanned, and even if you get one ballot and then another one shows up, the first one's been canceled. If you submit them both, that's a crime. We're going to know about it. Understanding that there's a signature verification process. In many cases, when in doubt, the voter is going to be asked to show an ID. And if not, the ballot doesn't count. People seem to think that there's more fraud, but it's a bit of an illusion. And the reality is that it's a safe process. We keep looking to make it more safe, more secure, and we'll continue to refine and build upon that process. So again, going forward, I certainly hope people don't think it's an opportunity to fraud for increased fraud, because if that leads them to maybe make a bad decision, I hate to have our folks come talk to them, but I think it's more of a perception issue than a reality.
And Randy, one of the things that I think one of the assemblywomen brought up, and I think was very, very pointed, was the mail-in ballot is very costly. And that was the biggest thing, is the cost. And every single county, all 17 counties, have to pay for that. And then they hope to get reimbursed, of course. But I felt really good when they had that opt-out option, because I know that'll save my county money. I also do the ballot in my computer. you know, so I can take it with me, not that I can use that, but I take it with me so I remember who I want to vote for and what the questions are, because I, you know, studied. And so I think that's one of the big things that also saves money if you print it at home and you don't get it mailed to you. So I know Clark has that as an option. I don't know if there's other counties that do yet or not, but I know they were all working towards that. But it's the costs, Randy. That's what really bothered me was, you know, if I didn't request it, why should I get one type issue? And that's where we came from.
So in looking at the 2020 election, can you tell me how many people voted in person, being day of and early voting, versus how many people use the mail-in ballot in the general election, not the primary? Do you have those numbers?
Is there a county that you're asking me about, or is this overall?
Overall.
The statewide? I'd have to ask Mark if he knows, because we usually have 17 different counties and they, you know, compile all their information and get it to us and then we report it out. But I don't think we brought any figures with us, but Mark might know an estimate.
Yes, ma'am. If I recall, and again, I can follow up and I'll get you some very specific information upon completion of this meeting tonight. But if I recall, of our electorate, it was about 75% turnout overall, of which, if I remember right, about 38 to 48% used a mail ballot to return it, either the absent that they requested or again one that had been sent to them as part of the provisions of Assembly Bill 4.
Okay. And going forward, do you feel that the legislature might essentially go to a full mail-in ballot, meaning we don't get a vote in person at all? Do you feel that there's a movement in that front?
I have not heard that, Randy. I don't know that that's what anybody's looking for. There were Clark County commissioners that were adamant about having a polling place for people, a place for them to go. So that's not anything that I've heard any chatter or talk about. I have not heard that at all.
And along those lines, Secretary, the concern, and I think the thing that most folks want to be aware of, that there doesn't, I agree, sound like there's a movement towards an Oregon sort of model, right, where it's only voting by mail. There is a cost to the taxpayers, though. When you have an entire vote by mail system, that's a very costly process, and an entire in-person voting process. You're now paying for poll workers. You're having to, in some cases, you know, pay for the gas to go to and from, to put, you know, the voting machines in different school gymnasiums and to pay people to man these locations. That adds up, and having it where it's both 100% is extremely costly. The reason other states, in some cases, haven't gone to completely one or the other is that it's been, if folks use mail more, there might be less of a need for in-person. Or if there's a heavy in-person, some folks might request absent ballots on their own, but there's usually a balance. Right now, we don't have a balance. Right now, we're going to be spending a tremendous amount of money going through the 22 election cycle, paying for both.
Unless you opt out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm glad to hear about that option. I think there's some concern in HR2, the bill that's in the House, that essentially kind of takes away some of the state's rights on voting. Have you guys reviewed that bill? I know it hasn't passed yet, but have you guys reviewed that bill to see if there really is some, I guess, threat to the state sanctity of elections?
Well, thank you for asking about that, Randy. And yes, we've been very involved, and we've given our input to Senator Cortez Masto, who has been the only one that's called and asked us our opinion. And we've told them that we don't support the bill, but we've also been able to tell them, you know, our input or our recommendations or where we think they might improve the bill or, you know, take something out, those types of things. Mark's worked very closely with her staff.
That's good to hear. I know that a lot of people are very frightened of that bill. I just realized it's 6:31, so I don't want to keep you two any much longer. We thank you for your time. If you want to just do a little wrap up for us, go right ahead.
Well, I would love to, Randy, and again, I just want to thank you and all of your members for being here tonight and talking to us and asking us these questions. We love to talk to any group that wants to learn more about the election process, because it is something that not everybody knows about and everybody understands, what we go through or what happens. I'm very proud of our election division. Mark and his staff have done a yeoman's job. They really do a good job. They will answer the phone. They will answer questions. And again, we will come to any group that wants to talk to us and ask us questions. So we just thank you very much, Randy, for having us here tonight.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Mark, for your service, as well as for your commitment to keeping our elections safe, and both of you for saying that. And Barbara, I'm going to follow up because I'm hosting Newsmakers in September, and I think I need to have you two on to talk a little bit more about this, because you've given me a lot of information that I didn't know. And I personally, I feel like but our elections are a little stronger than I thought they were. And I want to thank you guys for that, for reassuring us that you guys really are looking out for all of our elections. I remember, I want to say, Barbara, when Patty Caffaretta won for assembly, and I think she won by 1 vote.
Yes.
We've had elections in especially assembly seats where people have won by 6 votes. So every vote does matter, and fraud does matter, because that 1 vote costs an election. It can change, well, it definitely changes a person's life, but it changes our state's trajectory as well. So I really appreciate your guys' commitment to keeping our elections as safe and secure as possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, guys.
For anyone still on the line, just one quick reminder is that we have our September call that'll be coming up. So save the date for September 23rd. That's a Thursday at 5:30 p.m. And if you want to make sure you don't forget, you can click your RSVP link here tonight. And our special guest in September is going to be Washoe County Sheriff Darren Balaam, and he's going to be talking to us, his perspective on enforcing the Second Amendment, as well as but enforcing gun laws and protecting the Second Amendment in the northern half of the state. So I hope you will all join in to hear from Sheriff Balaam next month. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Randy. Thank you all for joining us tonight.